It turns out writers sometimes use Jesus as an inspiration for writing characters. Who would have guessed? And some of these characters are really weird. So I'm going to be ranking some of the weirdest Christ figures I've come across. By weird, I mean characters you would never compare to Jesus in a million years, but somehow fall into this archetype. Why am I ranking them? I don't know. Sounded fun. This video is going to be different from my typical video essay. If you like this ranking format, maybe I'll do more, so let me know. Before we get into this S-tier video, please remember this is just my opinion and I welcome respectful disagreement in the comments. I want to note that this video is not meant to be theologically sound. I'm taking traits, themes, and events from Jesus' story. This is not a representation of Jesus, Christianity, or the Trinity. Also, I'm gonna get this out of the way here so I don't have to repeat myself the entire video. I'm not forcing my beliefs onto you, this is just a fascinating archetype that I want to explore in a fun way. When I say things like Jesus died for our sins, I'm saying it for the sake of exploring the archetype. I'm not saying you have to believe it. Anyways, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy. Due to wanting to keep the characters in this video at least a little bit of a surprise, I'm not going to put list relevant spoilers here, only clip relevant spoilers. So just know that each character on this list will contain full spoilers. The Christ figure, also known as the Messianic archetype, Christ image, or Christ archetype, is a literary archetype and one of the most popular in fiction. Originally, a Christ figure was an allusion for, obviously, Jesus Christ. In modern day, the archetype has become a bit broader. More loosely, the Christ figure is a spiritual or prophetic character who parallels Jesus or other spiritual or prophetic figures. I think realistically, the other spiritual or prophetic figures would probably need to share some similarities to Jesus, or else this archetype kind of loses all meaning. Which means that a Christ figure character needs to draw parallels to Jesus, whether that be through traits, tropes, themes, or events. This includes, but is not limited to, the Chosen One, challenging the religious norm/societal norm, a second coming, saving/redeeming the world, performing miracles, which could probably just be considered being more powerful than others in that world, being guided by a spiritual father figure, healing people, and perhaps the most obvious, death or major sacrifice and resurrection. Christ figures don't need all of these qualities. Lots of them don't come back to life, and many of them don't even die. Often, the threat or intention of major sacrifice or sacrificial death is enough to make a character a Christ figure, such as Frodo from Lord of the Rings and Yuna from Final Fantasy X. Remember, these characters are not trying to imitate Jesus one for one, they are shadows and parallels of him. I think this, and just how many traits fall under this archetype, is what makes this archetype feel kind of vague. I mean, how many chosen ones are born or raised under odd circumstances? How many characters become martyrs? How many characters fight for justice and are kind? That means most superheroes are Christ figures. And you know what? Maybe they are. I think the Christ figure is a seriously watered down archetype, encompassing a lot of characters and even other archetypes and tropes. You start to get some weird characters that fall into it, characters that don't align with the namesake at all. The Christ archetype is strange to me. Played straight, a character can become too perfect to be relatable, the traditional upright hero who is inspirational but not realistically aspirational. Plus, if you're too on the nose, then it's less of an illusion and more of a direct reference, which can feel heavy-handed at best and downright preachy and lazy at worst. But if you decide to make a Christ figure relatable and human, then it's almost impossible to be played straight, and then you start to wonder if the character is even a Christ figure anymore. I mean, the Christ archetype can be as loosely applied as Jesse from Breaking Bad and as seriously applied as Paul Atreides from Dune. That's quite the range. But with the Christ figure being such a broad term, writers can play around with it, and you get some very interesting characters that fall into this archetype, but also end up subverting or inverting it in strange ways. Alright, now for some ranking ground rules. I'm only going to do one character per IP, or this list would just be a bunch of JoJo's and superheroes. Each character must have at least 2 traits of the Christ figure so that I don't stretch the archetype too far. A Christ on the cross pose is not going to be a trait I use unless it's extra evidence. This is so widely used, it wouldn't really be fair to apply it here. I might miss some symbolism. If you catch something I leave out, please leave it in the comments. If I went in deep with all of these characters and all the parallels, this video would be hours long and I don't have the viewer retention for that. The major question I'm going to ask myself when I'm ranking these characters: which characters combine Christ figure elements with elements that don't belong in the archetype in such a way that would make a Christian and a writer begrudgingly and even borderline refuse to acknowledge the character as a Christ figure. This includes subversions, inversions, themes, really anything that makes a character an odd pick for a Jesus archetype. Now, there is a caveat I want to talk about. The messianic archetype is about the role the character has in the events of the plot and can have any personality traits, even overtly villainous ones. Even spawns of the devil themselves can be messianic archetypes. Okay, I don't always agree with TV tropes, and I don't think I agree with them here. This doesn't seem to be universally agreed on either. I think if a character has many Christ figure traits, then even if they're evil, they could be considered a Christ figure. However, I think if they only have 2 or 3 and they're opposite in every other way in really important ways, then I don't really think they should be considered a Christ figure. I think the conflation of a Christ figure and a Messiah figure was kind of a mistake. I mean, by this logic, Dio from JoJo could be considered a Christ figure, but he's also basically JoJo's Satan. So I do think there is a line. Where that line is exactly, I think it'll vary from character to character. So while I was thinking of putting Dio on this list, I don't think I'm going to, because I think that would be stretching the archetype a little too far. If their morality and personality aren't parallel, then the events of their life have to be. And also, I know that I mentioned that I think it was a mistake to conflate the Christ figure and the Messiah figure, but I am still going to treat them as the same in this video, just because they are technically the same. Okay, let's get into the different tiers. Jesus with an edge. These are definite Christ figures with a twist. They are easily identifiable as a Christ figure. Jesus, I guess. These are also definite Christ figures, but it feels weird calling them that. Easily identifiable. Jesus? You sure about that? These characters invert, subvert, or are just completely opposite to the archetype in some way. They are harder to identify as a Christ figure. The penultimate tier is there's no way this is still Jesus. These are some of the weirdest Christ figures. These are ones that invert the trope, subvert it, and feel like borderline stretches of the archetype beyond reasonable means. They are hard to identify as a Christ figure, but they still are. And last but not least, Jesus is the OG JoJo. If you know, you know. These characters are not only the weirdest Christ figures, but the ones that invert the trope the most, subvert the trope the most, and altogether feel like they shouldn't be here, but still are. Identifying this character as a Christ figure will cause an argument. And for a little extra fun, I have another tier down here. Pretty self-explanatory, I think. Without further delay, let's commence the ranking and find the weirdest Christ figure of them all. First up is Bruno Bucciarati from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Wind. Okay, bro's gotta be one of my favorite JoJo characters. During my second rewatch of Golden Wind, when Bruno first appeared on the train to Giorno and proceeded to lick his face in order to find out if he was lying, classic JoJo moment, I had the idea for this video. Bruno Bucciarati is the deuteragonist of JoJo Golden Wind and the capo of a squad within a mafia. He is tasked with keeping Trish, the daughter of the mafia boss, safe from various assassins. The mission then evolves into defeating the mafia boss, who is not only a very powerful stand user, which is the main power system in JoJo, but also a psychopath. Bruno has a third of the disciples Jesus did, but they're just as loyal, except Fugo, aka Judas over here. Okay, maybe not a direct betrayal, but he did abandon them on their mission because clearly he didn't have enough faith that Bucciarati could get the job done and keep them alive, which turns out is kind of fair. So he's Judas and Doubting Thomas? Who named their kid after Thomas? He's like the second worst one. Okay. Bucciarati represents hope to his followers. Each were in an awful place, and he offered them a way to redeem themselves or the trajectory of their lives. He accepted their flaws and gave them the chance to live a better life. He literally has a follow me moment when he tells Fugo to join him. Also, I have seen the English version of this scene before, and the translators drove home the Jesus inspiration.
Leave your past and come with me. I want you here, demons and all.
Bruno might be a gangster, but he's a righteous and honorable gangster. He doesn't kill needlessly, he hates drugs, and he absolutely refuses to let Trish die, especially when he finds out the mafia boss, her father, is the one who wants her dead, which leads him to sacrificing himself for her. Good news is, though, Giorno does resurrect him. Kind of. Unlike Lazarus, Bruno isn't actually alive again. He's, to put it simply, basically a soul in a dead body. But he does technically come back to life, and just like Jesus, it's because he has a job to do, a duty to fulfill: protect Trish and defeat the mafia boss. So, turns out that Bruno's death was prophesied. Now, I'm not sure if there's a direct prophecy of the Jewish Messiah dying. I am not an expert, but the prophecies around the Messiah saving everyone, from a Christian perspective, were fulfilled through death, so I'm going to count this. Bruno's death was prophesied by a sculptor who was clearly visually inspired by Jesus. Just like Jesus' death is part of God's plan, the sculptor looking like Jesus kind of has some symbolism of Bruno's death being part of a divine plan, his death treated as inevitable and predetermined. He literally ascends into heaven when his mission is done. Now, Bruno is very close to being a played straight Christ figure, but there's a few things that make him weird. He is selectively righteous. When we first meet him, he puts on the mask of a slimy and aggressive gangster who, again, licks Giorno's face. Oh yeah, and he's also a gangster. He has a problem with indiscriminate killing and this one girl dying, and above all else, drugs. Which, yes, you could argue is a display of righteous anger, like the kind Jesus showed at the temple markets. But he still opts to join the mafia, an inherently immoral culture. Being selectively righteous doesn't mean he isn't righteous, but I think it means that the goodness in him can be overridden if needed. Bruno's manipulation and violence in joining a gang might have righteous intentions, but they're unrighteous means. Plus, and I can't stress this enough, he licks Giorno's face. I think I can solidly put him in Jesus, I guess. He's not so played straight as to belong in Jesus with an edge, but he's still pretty easily identifiable as a Christ figure. Next up, Rhea from Fire Emblem Three Houses. Rhea is the Archbishop, of the Church of Seiros, the main religion and a major political power in the continent of Fodlan. Okay. I was playing the routes back to back, and I was having a conversation with some friends, and we were talking about World War I, I guess. I don't really remember, because I ended up saying Archbishop Franz Ferdinand. That was embarrassing. Anyways, Rhea is a controversial figure. Most of the continent loves her, but some are trying to dismantle the church and her regime, and others believe she's downright evil. The Empire and the Alliance, two of the three political powers, are trying to, essentially, kill her and destroy her religion. Sound familiar? Even though she is politically and culturally powerful, she's technically persecuted. You know, she's attacked, she's locked up, and Three Hopes she is essentially forced from her lands and has to hide from the Empire and the Alliance. So, you know, she's bros with Jesus in persecution. After being deemed missing for years, she's feared dead. That kind of makes her a martyr of a sort. Basically, imagine if the Pope was killed by a country who wanted Christianity to have no power in society. It would make that country look like devil worshippers, and the Pope would probably be sanctified. Rhea represents the goddess in Fodlan. She is a symbol of hope and faith and righteousness. To the people who believed in her, killing her is tantamount to killing the goddess herself. Speaking of the goddess, Rhea is literally the daughter of the church's goddess. And yes, I know the Trinity is more complicated than Jesus just being the Son of God, but taking that as literally as you possibly could, Rhea is a direct parallel. Of course, most people don't actually know this, so she usually just goes about her day as the head of the Christian and specifically Catholic-inspired Church of Seiros, which also happens to be named after her. She is Seiros, just in a different form. And one of the routes of Three Houses, not telling you which one, Rhea goes beast mode and transforms back into Seiros, a sort of second coming, if you will. Now, a second coming has a few components, but mainly it's prophesied and it happens when humanity needs it the most. From Rhea's perspective, the Empire and an underground group of magic terrorists trying to destroy the church and kill her is putting the continent and its people at risk. Now, the body of Seiros is quote-unquote in a coffin, so most people think she's dead. Rhea is a godlike figure who figuratively comes back to life by returning to her divine form when humanity needs her to. At least in her opinion. Rhea is part of a divine plan as well, at least in the sense that she's the mastermind of it. She is trying to bring the goddess back to Fodlan, creating failed vessels and finally succeeding with Byleth, the main character of the game. In her mind, the goddess is the rightful ruler of Fodlan, and things were just better when she lived amongst humanity. Bringing the goddess back is a bit like bringing heaven to earth, which is said to occur when Jesus comes back. I've said a few times now that Rhea is hated by a lot of people. She is betrayed by Edelgard, the Empress of the Empire, who has supported the Church of Saros for a long time. And even worse, in a specific route, Byleth, the vessel that Rhea prepared for the goddess, also betrays her, which causes her to crash out. Now, I will say Edelgard was never a follower, and Byleth is if the player wants them to be, but they serve the same purpose of being close to Rhea and betraying her. Rhea is already at least in Jesus, I guess, territory, but I think she's worse than that. She is willing to manipulate the history of the entire continent in order to keep her religion a major power. Now, she does believe this religion is the correct way and best way to keep peace, but that doesn't excuse her methods. She keeps untouchables and malcontents in an underground slum. She rewrites history and bans true history. She keeps the feudal system going where worth is determined by crests, the power system of the world, and she is very quick to turn on people who betray her or are deemed unfit for life. She is a symbol of hope and faith and righteousness to the people, but none of those are paramount to her. Power is paramount. Keeping her hierarchy of gods and godlike beings is paramount. Yes, she has the best interests of the world at heart, but her own wants and desires and flaws are right beside it. She also basically lies by omission that she's the daughter of the goddess. And the Jesus themes that her character has are pretty much always fighting against a hunger for power and her own arrogance. And for that reason, I'm putting Rhea in Jesus? You sure about that? Okay, next up. Jack Klein from Supernatural. Okay, next up, Bella Swan. Fine, I'll talk about it. Jack Klein is a main character in the latter seasons of Supernatural. He is the son of Lucifer. Cool. Basically, he works with main brother duo Sam and Dean to defeat evil and, in the case of the final season, defeat God, who's also called Chuck, which I will be referring to him as for my own sanity. Supernatural really, got creative in those final seasons. Jack's origin story is freaking weird, man. He's basically the product of a political affair between his human mom and the president of the United States, who is possessed by Lucifer, so he's definitely got a spiritual father figure. You'd think that would make him the Antichrist, but he's less Nikolai Carpathia and more Ryan from The Boys, at least before Homelander started corrupting him. He's the classic boy raised by his mom to be good even though his dad is pure evil. But being the son of an archangel, he is a very powerful Nephilim, one of the most powerful beings in this universe, and also the grandson of Chuck, because the archangels are considered his kids. I can't with this lore. Jack might not be the son of God, but he is the grandson of Chuck. So, because Chuck is the final big bad, naturally he kills Jack. But don't worry, Jack is brought back to life in order to kill him right back. He absorbs Chuck's powers, becomes God, and destroys Chuck, saving the world and redeeming those Chuck Thanos snapped out of existence. At the end, when Jack becomes God, he decides to take a hands-off approach, which you could kind of see as a sort of Jesus ascending into heaven allegory, because Chuck lived amongst humanity for many years, and now his replacement, not that Jesus is a replacement, but you know what I mean, is going to watch over from at least a virtual distance. I think it's pretty obvious why Jack's one of the weirder Christ figures. He's directly related to Supernatural's God, but he's also related to Satan and ends up dying and resurrecting, not so he can fulfill God's plan for the world, but so he can stop his plan and kill him. A very inverted Christ figure, even though he obviously is one. I would put him in Jesus, I guess, but I just can't. Bella Swan from Twilight. Where the heck do I even begin with this one? The protagonist of Twilight, Bella Swan, returns to her childhood home of Forks, where she meets and falls in love with a vampire named Edward Cullen. She enters his supernatural world and ends up becoming a vampire herself. Oh, sorry, spoilers. Oops, sorry. There is a major symbol in the story of Twilight, and that is the lion and the lamb. Classic Christian imagery right there. Okay, but what does it mean? To put very simply, and I'm not an expert on theology, the lion represents Jesus as the conqueror of sin and the enemies of God. The lamb represents Jesus as the perfect sacrifice that took away the sin of the world. Just to let you know now, I'm going to be playing with this symbolism a bit. Bella is the lamb. She is the innocent girl who can do no wrong. As a human, she has the strange and innate ability to shield herself from vampiric powers, unable to be figuratively possessed or infiltrated by the vampires, which are symbolic of sin and temptation. This is just like Christ in the desert, who Satan tried to tempt and failed because Jesus, and likewise Bella, are the perfect lambs, unsullied and pure for their looming sacrifice. What the story of Twilight focuses on, however, is Bella the lamb as the prey, and Edward the lion as
the world's most dangerous predator.
As the lamb, Bella is Edward's redemption. He has a violent past that he's very ashamed of. Now he really wants to kill her because
Your scent, it's like a drug to me.
But he resists. Then he can redeem his violent past. Bella's existence in his life is basically offering him redemption, just as Jesus' sacrifice redeemed the world. I hope you know I am aware how stupid this sounds. Now, you might have noticed that Edward and the vampires are the lions of the Twilight world. Yeah, they're not the sin-conquering lion that Jesus is. They're the lion in a predatory sense, literally. At least until Bella becomes a lion. When she's transformed into a vampire, she never touches human blood. She never kills anyone. She has immense self-control in the face of temptation. Again, like Jesus in the desert. She is the lion in the same way that Jesus is, in that she conquered this metaphorical sin and temptation that comes along with being a vampire. I just made this way deeper than it is. You're welcome, Steph. Now, you might be wondering, Cassidy, you say she becomes a vampire. Doesn't that require death? Why, yes it does. Bella has a baby and the birth kills her. It drains the literal life out of her. You could even say that by dying, she's giving life. The parallels are paralleling. But she's turned into a vampire and thus comes back to some form of undead life. Now, I wouldn't exactly call Jesus quirky, but Bella certainly is. Quirky enough that instead of living and dying for an eternity in heaven, she lives and dies for an eternity on earth. That little meadow ain't Eden, sweetheart. She subverts the goal of eternity with God that Jesus died for, and instead aims to spend eternity with her temptation, aka Edward. But that could be symbolic of Jesus dying so we could return to him when we die. By dying and coming back to life, Bella is ensuring that Edward has an eternity with her. So yes, it's a subversion, but it also kind of lines up. Bella is basically Jesus if he was a quirky teenage girl who falls in love with a vampire. Like, it's obvious she's this archetype, but the fact that the messianic archetype could become Bella Swan is just fascinating and honestly an impressive feat of storytelling. Bella is very easily put into Jesus with an edge. She's one of the most Christ figures who ever Christ figured. Alright, time to get convoluted. The Trinity Processor and the Conduit, aka Pyra, Mithra, Numa, Malos, Elvis, Alpha, and A from Xenoblade Chronicles. Yay, I get to talk about Xenoblade. I always want to talk about it. The Conduit is, to put something complicated as simple as possible, an energy and power source that can act as a gateway between universes. It divided one world into the worlds of Xeno 1 and 2 and then disappeared. Now, you might be wondering, Cass, this video is about characters. Yeah, well, the Conduit was maintained by the Trinity Processor, a collection of, you guessed it, 3 artificial intelligences, Ontos, Logos, and Numa. Ontos would be divided into Elvis, Alpha, and A, Logos became Malos, and Numa became Pyra and Mithra. These 6 are the characters in question. Now, technically they are not the same thing as the Conduit, however they maintained it, had access to the power of it, and thus I would argue that they are inherently connected to it. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not treating these as individual characters. Mostly because they share themes that I'm going to talk about, but also because I just want to. The Conduit has many mysterious qualities, one of which is the ability to create life. This ability is somewhat passed on to the Trinity Processors, as they can, at least to a degree, use the Conduit's power. The characters that make up the Trinity Processor pretty much represent fate, or at least a vehicle of fate. The presentation to humanity of choosing their own destiny is basically the thematic role of the Trinity Processor. In Xeno 1, Ontos, aka Elvis, presented Shulk with the choice. In Xeno 2, Logos, or Malos, was basically the result of corrupted humanity choosing their destiny, while Numa, or Pyra Mithra, was the vehicle in which good humanity could choose their destiny. And in Future Redeemed, Ontos again, aka A, helped restore humanity's future while Alpha was trying to destroy it. Basically, the Trinity Processor is both Jesus within God's plan in order for humanity to be able to choose to be saved, and also a representation of humanity itself, either good or corrupted. And while it's low-hanging fruit, it's called the Trinity Processor. I mean, what do you want from me? But let's get more specific. Numa, as one of the Aegises in Xeno 2, represents both destruction and salvation. She can smite the world but also save it. She destroys an entire chunk of the world, a great flood if you will, millennia before the events of the game, and then sacrifices herself to save the world, and then she comes back. Granted, she does come back as two separate personalities, but she does die and come back to life. The other ones don't die and come back, but A does sacrifice their life for the world. If you want to get super in the weeds, you could say that if all the Trinity Processors are technically parts of a whole, then Malos and Alpha being corrupted by humanity is a little like Jesus taking on the sin of the world. Perhaps a stretch, but the Trinity Processor and the Conduit are literally crosses. Yeah, it's not your average cross, but neither is the Celtic cross, so I think it counts. The characters of the Trinity Processor are an odd combo of God the Father, Jesus, fate, humanity, and fallen humanity. While they do share some events similar to that of a Christ figure, I think it's more about the themes tied to them that really makes them feel like Christ figures. Really, it's the main theme of the game, choosing your own destiny. That's essentially what Jesus' sacrifice allowed us to do. It paid for our sins so we could choose salvation. The Trinity Processors are either the pure sacrifice that lives before and after death, or the sacrifice as it is corrupted with sin in between the first life and the life after resurrection. I think that makes sense. As Xenoblade tends to be, it's pretty abstract, which is why I think the Trinity Processor / the Conduit belongs in "there's no way this is still Jesus." They're pretty difficult to pin down as Christ figures, not because there's not parallels, but because it's more about the themes and the vibe, and each character within the Trinity Processor is slightly different and represents something unique on top of the broader symbolism. This is looking very lined up. I'm really not meaning for that to happen. Maybe I should have chosen more than 9 characters. Next up, Victor from Arcane. I mean, he's literally Arcane Jesus. That's just his name now. Victor is a terminally ill genius scientist. He and his friend Jace create a technology that blends tech and magic called Hextech, making them super successful, but that success isn't enough for Victor because he's dying. He uses the magic of Hextech to try to find a way to save his life, which essentially ends up turning him into a living embodiment of the magic. Okay, so I'm going to point out the obvious and most important thing. He has a staff. Bro is a shepherd of all the addicts in Zaun. The moment you have a staff, you become a Christ figure. JK, but also not really. Many people in Zaun are addicted to this magical drug that has infected them called Shimmer. They live in a dark and dank slum like lepers cast from society. Arcane Jesus appears to them and heals them of their drug-induced inflictions and the addiction itself. Naturally, this makes them follow him, though less like the 12 disciples and more like a cult. They have the energy of, everything is perfect now and we're all connected in the great circle of life, which gives cult. And as the story progresses, Victor ends up sacrificing himself to destroy a rune that is going to cause a barren future. Which is kind of like what our future would be if Jesus hadn't died for our sins, when you think about it. Victor is very obviously a Jesus figure. I put him straight into Jesus with an edge, but because he leads a cult whose members he basically destroys and values his own evolution over the safety of the world for a good period of the story, I think he subverts the archetype just enough to be put into Jesus, I guess. Ooh, I'm excited to talk about this one. Isaac from Castlevania. Alright, I haven't watched this show in 2 years, so bear with me. Isaac is a main antagonist turned pseudo-protagonist in Castlevania. He begins as a servant of Dracula, helping him in his quest to destroy all of humanity, a goal that Isaac too shares due to consistently bad experiences with people. I mean, I didn't jump to that conclusion, but whatever. Isaac slowly changes and decides to help humanity instead. My summary is really not doing this character justice. He's a good character, I promise. Isaac's goal is to build a world of love and loyalty, and his method is to eradicate humanity because he doesn't believe the two can coexist. While Isaac's method is slightly different, Jesus also wanted a world of love. Isaac wants to cleanse the world of evil. I want, of all things, a pure world, a clean world, where there is only loyalty and only love. So he is a forge master, a human with the ability to create night creatures, which are basically monsters with deceased souls animating them, essentially bringing that soul back to life, at least to a degree. So Isaac can bring the dead to life. As he starts becoming less cynical and less antagonistic towards humanity, he uses this ability to offer redemption to these night creatures. They are brought back from hell, and they're given the opportunity to serve him, to help him create a better world, as penance for their sins in their first life. Now, Jesus' sacrifice focused on the living, but it offers the same thing, redemption and a chance at a better eternity than hell. Isaac shares similar goals to Jesus, but his methods are, again, corrupted. He wants to cleanse the world not because he loves it, but because he hates it. He hates humanity, and the only way to achieve a world of pure love is by killing all of humanity, who are generally, in his opinion, devoid of love and goodness. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. For Isaac so hated the world that he decided to kill everybody. He says he wants a world of love, but it comes from a place of hatred, which isn't going to lead to a cleansed world, and he seems to realize that eventually because he gives up on that dream and decides to actually work on making a future that people can be good in. You can't hate love into being. You need to love love into being. It's only when he starts to feel more empathy towards humanity that he actually becomes master of his own life. When he was deep in his hatred, he was serving Dracula, and above all, his hatred. Letting go of that set him free, in a sense. You kind of need to squint to see him as a Christ figure, but his goals of cleansing the world and giving damned souls a second chance are too archetypey to ignore. He's not quite the stereotypical dark messiah, a subtrope of the messianic archetype, but he's definitely dark and definitely a sort of messiah, especially once he lets go of the whole wanting to eradicate humanity thing. I'm putting Isaac in Jesus is the OG JoJo. Oh my word! The first one! I mean the only one. Alright. Next up, Octavia Blake from the 100. Okay, so I'm just going to be covering Octavia up to the end of season 5. I have not watched beyond that, and I also haven't watched the show in many years, so once again, bear with me. Octavia Blake was born on the Ark, a ship that housed humanity in space. She and 99 other juvenile delinquents are sent to Earth to see if it's livable after a nuclear apocalypse. Spoilers, it is. Spoilers, people survive the nuclear apocalypse. Skip a few years and Octavia becomes a leader of humanity and helps him survive a second apocalypse, because the CW loves to reuse storylines. I swear they've ruined, actually good shows with reused storylines. So the Ark took a page out of China's book and had a one-child policy due to limited supplies on the spaceship. Having a second child was punishable by death for the parents. Octavia was, you guessed it, a second child, so she was hidden under the floor. Born under weird circumstances and then having to hide in fear of the governing powers? Where have I heard that before? Upon the 100's arrival on Earth, Octavia is the first to interact with a Grounder, a human who originates from Earth. She tries to establish peace and connection between the Grounders and the people of the Ark. Kind of reminiscent of how Jesus was a bridge between Jews and Samaritans, as well as the sick and healthy and the sinful and righteous. Eventually, she becomes a commander, which is the supreme leader of the Grounders. During this time, all of the Grounders, who form clans, as well as the people of the Ark, are fighting over a bunker with a second apocalypse coming. Instead of keeping the bunker for her own people, Octavia lets every clan go to the bunker, figuratively saving all humanity. Salvation is for the Gentiles, too. I'm a Gentile. During her years leading in the bunker, they run out of food and are forced to eat the bodies of the deceased. Due to the moral dilemma this obviously presents, but also facing extinction, Octavia decides to make it a crime not to eat, putting the burden of the act on her. She bore it so they didn't have to. She bore the responsibility of what salvation means, just as Jesus. I can't. Octavia is a violent and cutthroat leader who will do anything for her people, including damn everyone else. She's a good person at heart, but she's been corrupted by trauma and leadership. She can handle power, but at the cost of her own humanity. I think Octavia and a lot of other characters on this list is kind of what happens when you make a Christ figure a human. The archetype struggles to coexist with humanity. Jesus was human, but he was still God. He could handle all the trauma. Octavia can't. It turns her into a ruthless person who is, yes, self-sacrificing, but is also willing to sacrifice a bunch of other people if necessary. Even though early on she was all about everyone surviving, Octavia in season 5 is basically Jesus decided he'd only save the Jews and everyone else could just get damned to hell. Straight into Jesus? You sure about that? She goes. Ooh, last but not least, Light Yagami from Death Note. Light Yagami is the protagonist of the classic anime Death Note. He finds a notebook on the ground which happens to belong to a death god that gives him the power to kill anyone whose name he writes in the book. Light, already having a touch of the psychopathy, naturally decides that it's up to him to kill all the bad people in the world, which, naturally, leads to him believing he's a god. Through death, Light is trying to cleanse the world of evil. Now, it's not his death like it was for Jesus, but it is death orchestrated by him and a god for the purpose of ridding the world of evil. Now, of course, Jesus' death didn't rid the world of evil, but it gave humanity a chance to be saved from it, which is essentially what Light is doing. He's offering a far more direct approach to salvation. Granted, an approach without any choice or nuance. Light's method of salvation is controversial. Of course, the world powers decide he's a danger to society, which, I mean, a little bit of an overreaction. But the only real thing keeping him from killing anyone he wants is his own desire to become a savior and a god. The world powers, the cops, they don't believe he's a savior. They believe he's a villain who thinks he's a savior, which sounds a lot like the Pharisees thinking Jesus was the liar and a false prophet. This leads to a form of persecution against Light. Now, that persecution is literally just trying to stop him, but from his perspective, they are trying to get in the way of world salvation. How dare they? So, end of the show, he is cornered by the police and they kill him. It's debatable whether he dies as a martyr or not, but I think he does, at least in his head. He says he was the only one able to perform true justice. He's the savior. To him, the police killed a god. Light's power comes from a deity, a death god. However, the acquisition of this power is more reminiscent of, once again, Jesus in the desert, specifically Jesus on the mountain, and Satan offering him the entire world. Light accepted. He saw a deal with the devil and decided it was worth it, because change by any means necessary is better than none at all. In his mind, he's the chosen one, the perfect person to have picked up the Death Note and received this power, because no one else would have had the vision of a perfect world without evil and executed it. He is the definition of a dark messiah. It's kind of funny that a lot of what makes Light a Jesus figure is just his own delusions. Would killing all the bad people in the world solve all of our problems? It's a question all this time. Light says yes, and crime does go down in the story, because people are afraid to die at his hands. The story of Jesus, however, is in a way saying killing the one perfect person in the world would solve all of our problems, at least figuratively speaking. This is one of the main philosophical differences that feels like it doesn't really belong with a messianic archetype. I think a lot of people associate the Christ figure with the ideal hero, and the ideal hero would find a way to sacrifice themselves over a bunch of people, even if they're quote-unquote bad. Salvation doesn't come at the cost of humanity, it comes at the cost of one person, or at least as few people as possible. A lot of the Christ figures in this video do just that. The Trinity Processor, Bruno Bucciarati, Octavia, even Jack. The Messiah figure doesn't need to be good, but is usually self-sacrificial.
A character could have a bunch of Christ figure traits, but if they aren't self-sacrificial in their attempt to save the world, then they don't really feel like Christ figures. It's such an important part of the archetype, maybe the most important part. That's why a character like Dio doesn't feel like a Christ figure even if he has Messiah traits. And while Light sacrifices a normal life for his ideals, he is doing so out of selfishness. He wants to be God, and the way to become God is to quote-unquote save the world. His plan doesn't sacrifice himself, it sacrifices millions of people. He is a Christ figure, but fundamentally opposite to Christ in the most important way, which is why he feels kind of weird being here.
Even in dying for his ideals, Light doesn't sacrifice himself, he just doesn't concede. I think Light Yagami belongs in the Jesus is the OG JoJo. In fact, I'm just gonna... there. Because he doesn't feel like a Christ figure in the slightest, subverts one of the most major traits of the archetype, but still somehow manages to find himself a messiah. I'm done ranking now. Well, that was a very different video for me. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you are a returning viewer, don't worry, the video essays aren't going anywhere. I just had this idea and I wanted to try it out. Let me know if you like it. I might do more ranking videos in the future if you do. And if you liked the concept but think I can do something differently, let me know. This was my first attempt at a ranking video and I'm definitely open to feedback. If you liked it, leave a like if you like and check out some of my other videos because you might like those too. I hope you take my opinion as anything but gospel, but if you like my opinions, subscribing with the bell will guarantee you more of them. And I of course welcome your opinions in the comments, which I always love reading and I really appreciate. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you never see Christ figures the same way, because every time I finish a video, whatever subject I was talking about is now ingrained in my head and it low-key ruins some stories for me. Anyways, see you next time.